A massive thank you, as always, to patrons Sarah Turner, Rebecca Johns, and Justin Harper. This week's random call-out goes to patron Jen. Thank you for all your support. You can support us too at patreon.com/It's Not Just In Your Head, and or follow us on social media and help spread the word. Today, Max and Harriet speak to Renée Schuls-Jacobson, author of Psychiatrized, Waking Up After a Decade of Bad Medicine. For extra context, I've taken a section from much later in the interview and put that towards the beginning. It gives some details about what Renée's life experience was prior to the moment of being prescribed drugs that she would then be on for a very long time.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
Can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
To give a little backstory to my book, I have experienced a lifetime of trauma, and most of us have that. But when we're going through it, many times we just think we only know our own lives and we kind of normalize our life experiences. But some of the things that I experienced in my life were I had a mother who raged at me regularly and disciplined me with emotional put downs and frequent spankings. And then when my father would come home from work and I would try to tell him what had happened, my mother would say, "That didn't happen." And my father would say, "Your mother loves you. She said that didn't happen." So it was a lot of gaslighting there, which was extremely confusing. So I would get punished for what I felt like was telling the truth. I was telling the truth, but then I would be punished for telling a lie, right? On top of that, I endured a lot of sexual harassment through my life. I was brought up in a conservative religious community that was very prescriptive about what my role was as a future woman. That meant I was supposed to be emotionally supportive to a future husband, to cook and clean for him and our babies, and to help him in his dreams, right? I also survived a home invasion and a rape all before I was 17 years old. And I think it's really, I mention this because I think it's important for people to understand that all of these life events are cumulative. And just like if you had, I like to use the metaphor of like skin cancer. If you go outside in the sunshine, day one, and it's really bright sunshine, you don't come home with skin cancer. It's the repeated exposures to the bright sun and getting burned and things like that causes skin cancer to appear. And so I like to say that we all have like a little invisible cup inside of us that we can fill with trauma. And for some people, maybe they have a big gulp size cup, like maybe they can handle a lot of stuff. But some of us maybe have like a tiny shot glass size cup, and we have a lot that happens. And eventually that cup runs over, and that's when we start to experience the somatic symptoms associated with complicated repressed trauma. And so for me, for years, it looked like I was fine. Like I went to college, I went to graduate school, I got a job as a teacher, I was married, we bought a nice house, we had beautiful cars and took expensive vacations. And so from the outside, it looked like I was living this dream life. But to be honest, I knew that I had these life events that had impacted me, but I just stuffed them down and kept going. But then finally in 1999, there came that point where I just couldn't stuff anymore. The precipitating event was after the delivery of my son. I lost nearly 70% of my blood when my uterus didn't contract. And I was rushed into the hospital or into surgery for an emergency procedure immediately after his birth. And I remained in the hospital for over a week, during which time I was offered a blood transfusion. And while I was unconscious and like in that hospital room or in the emergency surgery, I had this near-death experience, during which time I floated over my body, and it was a very scary experience. A lot of times people talk about seeing like a white light and being reunited with all their loving relatives. that was not my experience. I saw something very scary. I saw dark, like ghosts and spirits swirling around me. I felt myself going through a chipper. I felt myself being cut and sliced apart. And I also felt like I was inhabited by an entity. And I know that sounds really weird, but I felt like I brought something back with me. It was very, very scary experience. And so when I came back to, and to consciousness, and I had this experience, I wanted to talk about this. I wanted to talk about the delivery. I wanted to find out how my son was doing. I wanted to talk about this crazy experience out of body that I had. And everyone was just sort of like you were just saying, Harriet, that everyone was like encouraging me to just be, you're fine. Why do you have to talk about that? It's over. You've got the baby. And I wasn't fine. I needed to process this scary stuff, and I didn't have anyone to talk about it. And so I just stuffed it. And over the years of stuffing, I developed insomnia. I couldn't sleep even if I tried. I had these horrible nightmares of feeling like I was back in that state and going through the chipper again. I felt like I was being surrounded by these weird ghosts. I would hear voices. I was having what, science would call auditory hallucinations. It was terrifying. And I was married to a doctor. And after years of this, he was finally like, Renee, you have got to go and see a doctor. And we made an appointment with my GP and tried a whole bunch of medications. Yeah. And ultimately I wound up, psychiatrized and on heavy sedating medications and I understand the impulse behind it. It was like, keep this woman functioning. She's decompensating. But what I really needed was I needed to talk to somebody who had been through that experience, right? And love me and hold me and tell me I was going to be okay and talk about all those other experiences that I had that I never had any support for. None.
Yeah.
And so begins the story of being on benzos for a long time, right?
That's the preface to the story.
Welcome, Renee Schuls-Jacobson. It is an honor to have you on the program because your book shows, and we will go over what your book is for our whole audience so that they can run out and buy it and read it and demand it at their libraries, because it shows what the market-driven medication profiteering health industry has done to our medical and mental health, and how you recovered from that medical model to have a creative and vibrant life. And it makes me wonder, do you see any role for medication in mental health?
It's such a great question. And before I say anything else, let me just thank both of you or all of you so much for having me on your show. It's such a great question about the role of medication in mental health. And I've thought about this a great deal. The short answer that I want to shout out is no, there's no role, right? Because I was so profoundly injured, and so many people, tens of thousands of people have been injured in similar way by these medications, these psychiatric medications. But I guess if I have to, try to find some kind of a middle place, I guess this is what I would say. I guess I believe that if someone is really in a dark place and they are inconsolable in that moment, for that moment, to get them to rest, sleep, take it easy for a very short period. And I mean, so they don't jump off of a bridge, or they don't, just so that they can have a moment to have a little bit of space between whatever is going on in their life. But beyond that, and this is my feeling and my experience personally, after that, I really feel like we are so off the mark with what people really want and need. And I can just tell you that when I was going through this, and I've now spoken to 504 people as of today, and other people going through this same situation. And what we all seem to want is to be seen, right? To be seen, to be heard, really listened to, and to be held And I know that when I was so sick coming out of this, I just wanted someone to hold me like a baby, like swaddle me, rock me, hold me, and reassure me that I'm going to be okay and that they're not going to leave me. They're going to support me and stay with me through this. Maybe not constantly, but they're not going to, someone's not going to leave me. They'll help me through this transition. And every person I've talked to, when I sort of ask them to think about what it is that they want, everyone says the same thing. They just want to share. People want to share their story, what brought them to this point, what was happening in their lives when it all when it brought them to medications, whether it's an antidepressant or a benzodiazepine or an antipsychotic or whatever the potions, cocktails may be. Everyone says, I wish I could go back to that time and I could say my story and really have someone say, I'm with you. I've been through this. You're going to be okay. How can I help you? What do you need? And if you can really allow the person going through the experience to lead and express themselves in that way, I feel like the rest would work itself out. But of course, that's a much longer process, right, than drugging someone so they can go back to their old life and get back to work.
Yeah, it is. Only in the short term.
Yeah, but giving someone that space that they would need and the love that they would need and the time that they would need. We don't even have that in our mental health profession. You get a 50-minute time slot and it's just not set up like that. People need a lot of time and there can't be someone coming in, immediately after them for their slot. So it's a complicated conundrum we're in. But so my short answer for the role for medication, I want to say in the ideal world, there isn't a place for it. But as we transition to something better, I guess short term would be my answer. Short term. And by short term, I just want to take the moment to say that in 2020, the FDA changed their guidelines with regard to benzodiazepines. And they have now said that they should not be taken for longer than a week. That is a huge change where previously there really had been no time frame set. And so people were, people considered short term, maybe a month, maybe 6 months. And that is certainly not short term. We now know.
That is so important. I've been in practice for 47 years now, and I never drugged anybody or suggested that they drug themselves because I don't deal with the homeless, insane, it's true, but I deal with people with a lot of trouble, and it's never been necessary. I also think that since these drugs usurp the brain's ability to soothe itself, you may need numbness for a short time, but numb should not be your existence.
Right, because it puts you in a state, people always talk about the fight and flight reflex, but of course we know there are other ways, there are other coping skills. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And to be numbed just keeps you in a state of freeze, and you're not getting you don't self-soothe, but you also don't get to really address whatever it is that brought you to this moment. You just kind of, people always joke, I've said this before, people always joke about those zombie shows, The Walking Dead. And I always say the zombie apocalypse is real. There are millions of people walking around half asleep, partially dead. And they look like they're perfectly fine. So
also, in addition to the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, when they studied only women, they found that the predominant reaction was to connect when they're in trouble.
Right.
Not to run away necessarily. They've studied overwhelmingly men to make these judgments, but for women, it's connect. And that's really the most important thing when you're so frightened and so upset. You need to connect with another human being who recognizes and appreciates you.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, our culture doesn't do a great job of even normalizing that because, of course, because
there's no money in it.
there's no money in it. The feminine experience has always been sort of pathologized, but also that so we've overvalued perhaps independence. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps and just keep marching on. And so, depending on your family of origin and the story that you've grown up in, people, men, women, doesn't matter. Many people are ashamed to ask for help or ashamed to ask for that connection. I know that's been very challenging for me. For sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I think sorry, just to say real quick, I think the
Go ahead,
medicalized,
Max.
I think the medicalized approach is kind of inherently disconnective, at least the way we do it. I mean, maybe there could be a connective way to do it. But it's like, okay, so here's some random person over here you've never met. They're going to talk to you for 10 to 20 minutes. They're going to prescribe you some pills. You take them on your own, and then you don't, like, the psychiatrist typically is not like on call, like, 90+% of psychiatrists don't do psychotherapy anymore like they used to. And yeah, so I mean that entire, just to kind of like extend that, right? Like,
yep, super fragmented, super alienating, right? Like you get one person for the meds and another person for the talk, maybe, right? Maybe.
And then maybe somebody else for something else. And then it's like, and then now it's like this, you're just being kind of like run around. And then also, especially if you're lower income, it's like, now, okay, well, actually this psychiatrist moved to the different clinic, or you can't see them anymore, or your insurance ran out or whatever. I mean, the whole thing is just like this layers of disconnection after disconnection, when I think, like Harriet said, I mean, regardless of how we like gender talk about it, like I think connectivity is just ultimately healing for anybody. So like feeling that connection with somebody. So anyway, yeah, I think the whole system is like anti-connection for the most part.
It is, because it's pro-capitalist. The idea is profit. I know that psychiatrists, because they are paid a third, when they're on insurance, they're paid a third of what they are in person. They give people at most a third of an hour, 20 minutes. So they find out how your meds are doing and then give you more. But if the idea were not to make money, but actually to help people, then they might, follow Bertolt Brecht, the famous communist dramatist poet. He has a line in one of his poems: "You, I beg you, show not wrath nor scorn, for we need help from every creature born." With that philosophy, then people come for help. They don't come to have mind-altering drugs.
Yes, I agree. And I would also say, though, the hard thing in this is when there's a weird line between asking for help and looking to be fixed, right?
Yes.
We have to really start to inform people that, like, we can help each other, but can't fix people's situations for them. And when the origin of these drugs, like why they came into, when they started being used and under what circumstances, these drugs were truly for control and to just keep people quiet. And that can't be what we're doing anymore. That's like you just said with your quote, if every person has value, we cannot be shutting up 94 million people. It just, people need to be heard, and their stories need to be heard. There's repercussions for silencing people like this.
I think it can be kind of like a cover up, and a what would we call it? I guess a cover, because like if you think of it too, we interviewed this anthropologist months ago named Roy Grinker that wrote a book called Nobody's Normal, and he wrote about kind of the history of mental illness and when it got to wars. And how PTSD was like initially mostly because of looking at how like war vets came back and like, oh, look at all these medical symptoms they have, and then from that, and you have, just sort of once you started talking about women about, sexual abuse experiences and stuff, and you're like, oh, look at all these medical symptoms. But these are reactions to like
trauma.
Like well, yeah, but trauma, I think even expanding beyond trauma, because I just think that even the way trauma is talked about at this point, I'm just increasingly not a fan. Like, it's like war is a sociopolitical issue. Like women being like the rates of rape and sexual misconduct against women is like a sociopolitical issue. So like those are like social issues.
And I would add, it's a moral wound. These are moral wounds.
Right. Yes. So medicalizing, saying, oh, well, we're going to do this like medical intervention for something that's ultimately a political, a moral, a sociological problem is it actually helps cover up what the actual source of the problem is. So as long as everybody sort of ideologically buys into this idea that it's medicalized, it helps us, it prevents us structurally from even trying to solve the problems.
Yeah.
Renee, would you expand a little bit about your statement that this is a moral issue? How is it moral, and what are the ramifications of seeing it that way?
Well, just like Max was saying, and again, I'm just going to speak to my story a little bit and then generalize, but back in 1985, I was raped while I was, just prior to my going to college. It was someone that I knew, and there was a power differential without saying too much there. He was quite a bit, a few years older than me. I was 17, had not yet gone to college. This person was now a college graduate. And I just think that at the root of all, I heard Max saying you're not a fan of the trauma informed stuff, but it's a good place to start with people.
Sure. Yeah.
Because what I now understand after talking to all these people is every person I've spoken to has this place where they've been injured. Either their sexual trauma, their needs were not being met in some way, emotional needs were not being met. And sometimes people are, it's a wounding of like what we somehow know at our core, in our just, I have to believe that this is my worldview, that we all have a system of right and wrong. Even the most messed up people have a sense of that. And when those who are, whether we're being inflicted upon or, find ourselves victimized by someone else, the person who's inflicting the wound knows that they're not doing a good thing. And there's injury there and there's a wounding there. And if you're on the receiving end of it, something obviously feels just awful to be on the receiving end. And it makes you question everything about what you've ever known to be true in the terms of morality. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but there's that place where we have this connection to a higher power, whether we know it or not. It's a real thing, but you have to get very quiet in order to hear it. And most of us just stay busy, and loud and just continue doing without ever questioning what it is that we're doing. And that's sort of what Max was saying about like the conspiracy or it's a veil that's up between us and the world. And when you get really still or you have something happen in your life that is traumatizing and you have to slow down, the veil is dramatically lifted. And you can't help but to see that all the institutions that we've been taught to buy into, like trusting our religious institutions and our religious leaders. I mean, they're molesting children or not all of them, but you know what I'm saying. And then
Yes.
Our education is teaching us a certain way, but what is it really teaching us? The right things, and then our legal situation. Who are those laws set up to protect? The medical situation, our medical education, even the way doctors are trained. I have no doubt that doctors go into medicine, many of them, because they want to help people, but their training is set up to, frankly, injure people. And I could just go on and on with every institution that we've been taught. And at the root of these things, I think there's good intentions, but something has happened for sure over the last probably, I don't even have the exact, but for sure the last half a century, probably even a little bit longer, that all those well-intentioned institutions, now we're looking at them and seeing, wow, how corruption has crept in, how, like you're saying, the capitalist piece. And capitalism, to me, just seems to be, you have to have a lot of integrity, personal integrity, to work against what capitalism sells us every day.
Well, I think what you're saying is so profound, Renee, because what you're explaining is why 600,000 people since the early 90s have died from overdoses, because they need relief. because their lives have changed and they don't have meaning, and the institutions they trusted no longer come through. So you have a polarized vision. And it reminds me that something that I saw at Occupy when I was there in New York, there was this Viet vet, and the same thing happened when I went to an Occupy in California, who said that they gave me all sorts of treatments that sucked. But coming to these protests and saying it doesn't have to be like this is the best treatment I've ever gotten. So that one of the antidotes is political activism to change the moral truths that are ruining your life.
Yes, agreed, agreed. And I'm, very interested in the Benzo Information Coalition. I'm a huge fan of the work they're doing. It's an all volunteer organization. And I wish that organization had been around. Well, first of all, I wish it had been around prior to ever putting the medication in my mouth. But I wish it had definitely been around, before I was ever trying to get off of the medication, because I would have had a lot more information. And for sure, it's brought purpose to my world. I don't want anyone else to be injured like this. I mean, that's a real motivating force in my life. And I have to just add for a minute, I am very fortunate because I had a financial cushion when I was going through this, and many people do not. And
Right.
I do like to be pretty transparent about that, I was in a good, I was married to, a good
Doctor.
partner. Yeah, doctor. And he came through financially as we moved through our separation and ultimately our divorce. And he's a person of integrity. And he, I was able to really take the time necessary to heal myself, to really slow down and allow my brain to recalibrate and get back to homeostasis and explore other types of helpful homeopathic and can, like you're saying, ways to connect with people to help me to figure out what I needed specific for myself. And other people are just closed out of those opportunities. Like you said, if you're a vet and you're homeless, you don't have a cushion. You don't have the ability to try out all these different, options. You may be sleeping on the street. You may have one set of clothes, and people aren't going to be prone to stop and sit with you if you don't even just smell good on a basic level. So there's a lot of human. That's the social justice piece, I think, and I could go on and on about that. I really feel devoted to making sure that everyone is seen, and not to make myself sound like a prima donna or a Pollyanna or anything, but anytime I see someone on the street, I just, who's homeless, you just know there's a trauma injury there. There's trauma, so old, way, way, way old stuff for people to be in that place. And I, as a former English teacher, I love to hear their stories and listen to them. And every time we cry, we connect. And in general, I'm sort of known for asking people what they want. And I've been known to get people entire set of clothing, bring them back to my house to take a shower. I'm not advocating that everyone do that, but it's just a real thing for me to just meet people where they are, get them food, whatever they need.
Well, I think what you've done is really profound, because what you've done is you've created a moral and spiritual connection to mental health and connection and spirituality and morality. Because I think that people who, I think that's the secret of the 12-step programs, that whatever your higher power is, in addition, the higher power is the support of the group.
Yes, and they say keep coming back, right? Keep coming back, which is better than most of the mental health stuff, because
that's right.
Like Max was saying, it's so fragmented. But here you can go to any meeting and you meet some people and you have something in common and talk.
And it's free.
It's free, right, exactly.
It's free, and the spiritual basis is in connection, we heal.
That's right.
Rather than with a pill, we heal. And no therapy works, no psychotherapy works unless there's a connection, unless there's caring, unless you're seen, unless you're heard. It's not a technical matter. And I think that connection between morality, politics, spirituality, and the way mental health is one that hasn't been worked out and is totally crucial.
Yeah, and I would just add too that I really believe that people are at different levels of spiritual awareness. I mean, I've really come to understand this so much over the last few years that some people really believe and feel that medication helps them, right? I mean, there are those people who are like, I'm so much better now that I'm taking, insert name of drug here. They really believe it. And it's not my job to try and convince them otherwise. It's not.
Right.
So I don't need to preach. I don't need to postulate, I don't have to get up on my soapbox, but there are equal number of people who are coming to realize over time that they're starting to have memory issues, cognition issues, Parkinson's, Alzheimer-like symptoms, tremors. And these people, if you've been through the mental health system, and I talk about this in my book a lot, if you've bought into this for a long time, you believe there is something wrong with you, that there is a chemical imbalance in your brain, that it's just a matter of finding the right drugs. And it takes a lot of effort to convince people that that they could be okay, that they actually could be okay without their drugs. It's a I hate to use that word crutch, but people really believe it. It's brainwashing, right? That's the dominant narrative, cultural narrative, is there's something wrong with you and the medication is going to help you, just like medication helps someone with diabetes or, and that's, or insulin is the one they often say, if you needed insulin, wouldn't you take your insulin? And so the story around it is so powerful. People are afraid to come off of their medications, and it's not an easy thing to do.
So we've had flack. I think so earlier on in the podcast, we had one or two episodes where we went pretty direct on this, and Harriet's actually been a lot more direct on this than I have. Basically just sounding like we're anti-meds as a blanket statement. We had to do a clarifying episode. We pissed off 2 or 3 people that are like, I would kill myself if I weren't on my meds and stuff. And
Right.
I'll say this, because people aren't going to listen to all however many episodes. I'll just say I was on and off antidepressants, a mood stabilizer, and something else from my teens to, right before we started the podcast. And then I was on antidepressants again from something from a year ago. And this is, by the way, the self-disclosure crap. Purpose of it, just like in therapy, that it actually, when I was talking to Harriet before we did the podcast, and she was talking about all this stuff, and I rekindled my interest in actually the research behind this, of finding, for example, that when the what do they call it, when the freedom of information, there's some kind of investigative journalism stuff done where they pried out the research from the SSRI manufacturing companies, and found that if they included all the actual studies where they showed the pills didn't work, and they added the ones where they showed that they worked, and if you would have combined them together, they wouldn't have met the threshold to meet the FDA approval, and none of them would have been put on the market, from Prozac to whatever all the other ones, like the main generic ones, right? And then so I even went back and I was like, wait, how the hell did I? And I realized that the community mental health clinic I was working at, where we're working with child trauma, sexual abuse, neglect, meth addict mom, dad gets deported. All that stuff, that a few of my coworkers were just like, oh, you've been seeming really depressed, maybe you should go on meds and stuff. And that's where it came from. So and then when I went off, I was like, there was a dip, and then there were some changes, but I had to struggle harder to figure out what else to do. So anyway, I don't tell the story a lot, in part because people want to believe that, the professionals are not like people with struggles or whatever. And so it kind of kills the vibe. But and you know a lot of people like this other than yourself. I've met a lot of people like this. I guess but to almost contradict everything I just said, though, how do you feel about because some things are biological, right? So I'm going to say the opposite thing of what I just said. So I remember talking to a holistic psych one time, and he was like, well, if you take fish oil before bed, and black cumin oil, and get more sunlight, and do this and this and this, and he was like, because that actually would have the same effect of what they say that such and such pill does. But those supplements are actually more expensive than the pills, right. Oddly enough. Fish oil, actually having 1 or 2 fish oil every night, which is good for mood regulation and stuff. and because of the omega-3s, like it's actually more expensive than getting like
Your
Abilify or whatever. Yeah, like a mood
$5 a month,
stabilizer if you
right?
qualify for bipolar. So
Right.
so it's like, well, okay, so something that we're calling natural, or if you ate like good quality fish, like
Right.
2 to 4 times a week, like for some people that qualify for what we're calling bipolar or something like that, right? So I'm just
Right.
curious what you think about that. Like there is a biology to it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And
yeah,
I guess, well, yeah, I mean, I don't even know. Like, I'm not a medical professional. So I've only, so here's what I would say is just like you said, I want to go through a checklist then. I want to find out, what are you eating? We all are very sensitive. We are all very different genomes. And so what are you eating? Is it healthy? I want to know, are you exercising? I want to know where you lived. Are you getting, enough sunlight? Are you isolate? How many hours of the day are you isolated and interacting with other human beings? A whole source of a bunch of questions. Do you like your job? Like when you were saying that you were working with that population, Max. So I'll tell you something, and this is a little off track, but maybe not so off track.
Why I always get things off track. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. No, I love that. But it's like and this is a hypothetical right now. I want to come back around to it though. But like you were saying who you were working with, that population, that's a very hard job emotionally, right? Like working with that population. And I was an English teacher for 20 years at a very affluent private school. And I loved teaching, but the parents were rough. They had very high expectations, and the kids were driving nicer cars than the teachers. I was not making really even enough to live by myself if I hadn't had a combined income with my, then fiance at the time. And I didn't take care of myself. I would teach all day, and then I had to do a club after school, and on weekends I was handling the SATs, and I wasn't getting enough exercise, all these kinds of things. And it was very stressful. And so even though I was very good at it, and on the front end, I was super prepared, and my students loved me and felt like they were getting a great education. And I know this because it's decades past. And, I know all these people now. I mean, I know many, many, many students. I'm connected to them on social media. But on the back end, which nobody could see, I was really struggling. It was hard work. It was pretty thankless. I was still not, I was depleted. I had completely depleted my own love tanks, or whatever you would say, and I didn't have a way to really fill them. And so even though I was good at it, temperamentally, I was not well suited for that profession, because it was like doing 5 shows. I always say 5 shows a day, and I'm much more of I look like I always say I'm an introvert, but I play an extrovert on TV, right? Like I can summon this thing because I love people, but I also need a lot of alone time, and I wasn't getting it. So I guess I'm just saying, to go back to your question, I feel like I'm not throwing out, all medication, but I would really want to explore those things. Long before I was giving somebody something as powerful and as potentially injurious as something to take, like an SSRI, or particularly, my experience is like, benzodiazepines, which are just so powerful. And so I'm not saying that there isn't biology, and I certainly, there is biology, but I guess I would just use the sentence to say, I believe people are being grossly overprescribed, right? Grossly overprescribed.
Well, and they're being nudged toward the biology side as if it's compartmentalized outside of the psycho and the social and the spiritual and everything else, because it's profitable.
Yes.
Like that's why it's the default. That like the default still today is, and I think it's maybe shifting. Do you think it's shifting? Like that I mean, I think 10 to 20 years ago it'd be just, oh, I'm depressed, I need to see a psychiatrist and get meds. I mean, that's still pretty normal, but I do think there's somehow a shift. I mean, maybe I'm full of crap.
I know
on this, but
this is the world that we live in. I think that you and that those of us associated in this world, like I feel like things are shifting. If it is, it's awfully slow. I know that there's still a lot of doctors out there, prescribers out there who just believe that, oh, well, that one's not working, we'll try this one. And if that one's not working, we'll try that one. And you can add this. And the commercials certainly suggest that there's a lot of that still happening, right? Oh, your drug's not working. Well, you can add this one. And, constipated. Well, you can add this. It's a big mess. And I really do feel like at the root, there is a lot of trauma. And can I suggest something really like revolutionary? I don't know that I'm necessarily the first one to think of this, but, and maybe you've even talked about it. I certainly haven't heard every episode, but y'all know who Dr. Ferber was, right? Dr. Ferber. Do you know who?
I don't. And by the way, Harriet dropped, so she might, but she's not here.
Okay.
But
so Dr. Ferber was that person who believed that babies need to cry it out. Right. That like the best thing if a baby's crying, this is like a big thing when I'm 54, but it was a generation of infants like born in the, 60s, 70s, 80s. That the idea was that if a baby is crying, you don't go and pick up that baby right away. You can let them cry it out. They need to learn to self-soothe. Right. So that's 3 generations, right? Like 60s, 70s, and 80s of children who potentially their parents were not picking them up when they were crying. And we now know like babies can't be expected to self-soothe. Babies need to co-regulate, they need their mom or their dad or a heartbeat to soothe. And I think about this all the time, that perhaps the reason why this we're seeing such an uptick in people wanting medicine is, what if 3 generations of babies were really not getting what they needed from the crib long before that we could ever say this happened to me, but it's like a body memory. And now all those people have had children, right? So we have like anxious children or anxious adults who now have the next generation of anxious children on top of whatever might happen in your normal life. And so I've always thought about this, that like, I didn't raise my son that way. I was like, if my kid's crying, I need to pick him up. And I got a lot of flack for it within my family system. And I'm hardwired. If a baby's crying, I can't let that baby cry. I mean, I'm talking babies, not the one that gets to be a manipulation when they're a little bit older. But I've always thought about that what if that's what's been going on, that we just have like these generations of children who were somehow raised and were now adults, anxious adults, whose emotional needs were never met. Plus you have all of life's other stuff piled on top of it. And now we're trying to raise children too in an ever increasingly alienated world with more technology and blah, blah, blah. You get what I'm going on. I just wonder sometimes, like, you're talking about biology and I'm like, maybe it's a trauma that occurred between 0 to 3 and we can't even remember it.
To augment your theory, I get the feeling that it's really about power, because a load of parents were misled at that period of time because someone with more power in an authoritative position was saying this, and everyone just sort of did it or believed it. And I think that's sort of the wider thing that a lot of this is attached to. And in some ways, the theory just about all these kids being sort of unknowingly traumatized lets off the hook of a lot of social, economic things, And I think that the thing that I really got from reading your book was how power had operated through the course of your life, whether it was the family unit, whether it was religious institutions, and then sort of came to a head with the sort of combination of the medical establishment trusting in doctors, and also that being so close to home because your then husband was a doctor as well. And
Absolutely.
just all of that stuff, it felt to me whilst reading it, just exactly this idea of a lot of systems, a lot of structures of power that one had assumed were there for you and had your best interests at heart, but your sort of grueling roller coaster of being medicated and trying to get through it, sort of just slowly peeling back the sort of layers of the onion, or sort of unplugging from the matrix and just realizing how all of this stuff is connected and how all of it really wasn't about you. It was about trying to silence you or trying to sort of mute you, your emotions and all this kind of stuff. And I think, I guess this is stepping back in terms of from where we began, but it's your story is sort of like like some sort of psychic odyssey towards some kind of sanity and some kind of creative happiness. I don't think necessarily I actually now have a question, but it was just more the impact of the story and of the book. But power was the thing that just kept coming back. It's just like, and I felt relieved that you had found your own authority.
Yeah. And I would just add to that what you're talking about is that external expert, right? That like, I really had so many experts that I had, that I didn't even realize that I had been listening to. I went to a college that told me a narrative. And then obviously I had a conservative religious upbringing and I was listening to that. And there was my family story, and then I married a doctor and all that stuff. And then, but there was, throughout all of it, the power was external to me, that I was supposed to listen to all these other experts. And this has really been a journey back to myself and my own internal, my own connection with my own higher power and my own internal, like being quiet and listening to what I know is right for me, even if it's not right for everyone else. That's where I've circled back to. And it's really about personal integrity. I wish everyone would get there. I really, I do.
Well, Harriet, there's tech issues for Harriet. So listeners, you're not hearing Harriet because there's tech issues.
Lol. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things then, I guess, I can't remember where it cut us off, but certainly towards the end of the book, that there is sort of a discovery of, or part of the process of ultimately feeling better. One was sort of alternative therapies or alternative medicine, and the other was sort of creativity, essentially, and art. And so I think that actually might be quite a sort of common experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to hear what your experiences have been and how it's helped you.
Yeah.
Or how it's helped you.
So as I was sort of saying before we lost each other for a minute, was that, even though I was a really good English teacher for decades, I'm not sure I was temperamentally really, meant to be doing that, because it was so depleting. And so when I was healing from this injury, it was so profound. I couldn't walk or talk or read or write initially. I couldn't drive. I needed everything was too bright. It was like being chemically concussed. And so over time, when you have hundreds of hours and you're in agonizing pain, and you can't do the things that you were trained to do and that you sort of love to do, it's like, well, what can you do, right? You have to find something. And people always talk about it as like a distraction. You have to find something. So some people do puzzles, some people hook rugs, and for me, it just so happened that I started to make art. And that happened because a friend came over to see me, and she came over to visit me while I was healing at home. And she brought me the kinds of very inexpensive supplies that you would give to an elementary school student, like construction paper and magazines and paste and stamps and, all that kind of stuff. And she sort of said, do you think you could draw or paint? Here's some crayons, here's some markers. And I was furious at her. I was in so much physical pain, but also emotional pain and psychological pain. It was terrible. And I was bedridden and disabled. And I just said to her, I have never done this before. What makes you think I would be able to do anything now? Just get out. Like, I can't do anything. And sort of as an act of, I think I was sort of trying to prove that I couldn't do anything. I started ripping paper and scribbling and gluing and sticking. And I just made like a sticky mess of it. My first one was a heart, and it was just layers and layers of paint and words that I painted over and glued over. You get the idea. And I posted it on Facebook. And I sort of explained to people, in case you didn't know, I have not been around because I'm going through this thing. I came off of this very commonly prescribed medication called clonazepam, and my brain's fried. And this is all I can do now. This is what I did today. Here it is. And I put it up there on Facebook, and to my bewilderment and surprise and awe was people wrote back and said, actually, that's really beautiful. Could I buy that from you?
Wow.
And I was stunned because I never did really art in college and in high school. There were prerequisites requisite classes you had to take, but I certainly was not identified as an artist. And so people expressed, they thought it was really beautiful. And I said to the very first person, I said, well, I'm not going to sell this to you, but if you come over to visit me and sit with me for a while, I'll give it to you. And for a long time, that's what I did, is that I would get up, I would make something, I would post it. Someone would say, I love it. They would ask how much. I'd say, come over and visit me, and it's yours. And slowly and organically over years, these hearts, what I call my primitive heart, period, during which time I made hundreds of these things and gave them away, and then started to, do more. People were like, you should charge for these. They're really beautiful. I would be willing to pay, at least so that you can continue to replenish your supplies, like, let me buy you more paint, let me buy you more canvases. And so I sort of was like, well, that's a very real world thing, right? Like, if I wanted to make more art, I needed to buy more supplies. Paint isn't free. Canvases aren't free. So I started to do that, and I started to sell them for $12 and then, $20 if I was shipping them. And then the canvases got bigger, and then the subject matter changed. And over time, as I started to get better and better over the years, I became more connected. People started to share their stories with me and say, I'm going through something too, and I finally in 2017, and so this is over a 4-year period, but by the time it was September of 2017, I had collected paintings and stories I had set a goal to do 18 portraits, like really large paintings. Now we're talking, my canvases had moved up to 16 by 20 size from something that was very small, like, lay in bed kind of size. And it was a goal of mine to just do 18 of these portraits. And by 2017, I had done, I think it was 85 of them.
Wow.
Of people who reached out to me to say, I am going through something that's invisible too. And I would paint they would send me a picture of themselves. I would do some kind of illustrative sort of, I never really know what to call my style, but it's like, it's a very interpretive, it's non-realistic portraits, but very, people were giving me a picture of themselves to work from, and then I would take it through my own filter. And I ended up doing a show in 2017 and at a local art gallery. And after that, things just started to continue. Like, I understood that there was a market, strangely, that this thing that I was doing that was helping me to feel connected to people that other people liked, and they wanted to have it. They wanted to own it. They wanted me to do one of them. They wanted me to do their sister or their mother or their brother. And it was a revelation to me, and frankly, a miracle, because I really started to think, oh my gosh, I can do this thing that I absolutely love to do, that is helping me, that's making me feel good, that's actually giving me a wage. it's sort of effortless for me, and it's helping me to connect with other people. And I'm, I- I'm, I love it. Like I love it. I love doing it. And people are crying when they're receiving, like it was a good energy exchange. And, I, I felt like I was making enough money to, I don't have a lot of expensive tastes. I'm not a country club girl. I don't have a golf game or whatever. And so for me to be able to make art and to connect with people, was super organic. And then people sort of said, well, do you have a website? And I didn't have a website. And slowly I started to investigate how to do that. And I met people who agreed, they were excited, and they were willing to help me with that. And I think you get the idea of where I'm going, was that then I started to do shows, and I didn't know how to do that. And people were like very helpful there. They sort of mentored me and said, well, you need a tent, and then you need a table, and that's all you really need. And slowly it became a business. And I always like to tell people that making art for me was never a business plan. It was a coping mechanism. And it is truly the thing that I do when I can't not do it. I every day I need to make something. It's just the way I express myself. And not every painting is a winner. Some of them are not meant for that. But many of them speak to people. And so what my art specifically is that it's funny, it's a blend of all of me. I was an English teacher prior, and now I found a way to blend significant words or affirmations. Like when I was sick, people would say something to me, and I would put that into the artwork. So I always try to blend a sort of a whimsical image with a very powerful, positive affirmation, usually powerful affirmation. And it just resonates with people. And I really started to understand it's that old saying of like, if you build it, they will come, kind of, that like I was just doing what was natural to me, and my natural God-given gift that was revealed to me during a terrible time where everything that I knew myself to be, I knew me to be, was just taken away. I couldn't do any of those things. And this window was open, this new door was open, and I just started to step through it. And so, it's been a slow journey, but now I realize that this filter through which my art comes is uniquely mine, and I feel blessed. Like, it's a very weird thing to say that from out of that dark night of the soul, there have been gifts, and I'm truly a changed person on this side. I'm so profoundly grateful to have connected with that part of myself that I didn't even know existed.
And yet someone just gave you supplies that you rejected and yet used. And it sort of speaks to try to reach someone, give them something. Who knows? No.
Yeah. It was just like a seed. That was what she knew to offer, right? That's what she knew that was helping her students when they were upset. She would have them go to a corner and scribble or draw. And she just thought maybe you could do the same thing. And I was just like, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? But yeah, all we can do is plant those seeds. And
but then you took it to fate. You also had the courage to say on Facebook, this is what I made, even though you didn't think it was great. So you put it out there.
Yeah. And that, like I said, that was stunning that people responded the way that they did. I for a long time, I thought it was pity. I thought people were pitying me. They felt bad. And so they would, but what I've learned since then is people really don't spend money on things unless they want them.
Right.
They liked it. And that was a new thing for me. That was a self-esteem thing and a confidence thing. And it's, I said, that's an ongoing project for me. I'm always having to remind myself I can do this thing, even though I was not classically trained. I mean, I'm doing it and I love it. And more importantly is that now I use my artwork as a way to, to raise awareness for this mental health issue in our culture. When I do a show, and I have one tomorrow, I always have a sign, and now I have my books out there, and I just explain to people, that all of this artwork, this whole practice is it started while I was healing from an iatrogenic injury, a medically
Yes.
caused injury, and that I'm not alone. And one of you said this before, that that it does seem to be the way to heal is it is a common beat. Which makes me always wonder if it's like the artists who are being drugged, but it's some people, they take up a musical instrument. Some people learn how to bake bread. Some people hook rugs, but it does seem to be that it's that creative. Some people make podcasts, right? Like it's somehow a creative endeavor that helps us to connect with other people, and it is healing.
Yeah, well, if it's been also duplicated in its own way, in its own fashion by other people, then the part of the healing is connection and appreciation, and part of it is finding your creative expression, whatever it is, so that you can be there as you in the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so I feel like I'm so blessed that I've found this way to blend my love for words, my love for art, my love for color, my love for teaching, because I also teach art classes. I do a Wednesday night Zoom art class that is, runs February to June, and then we pick back up again in the fall. So I'm sort of on a little bit of a rotation. We have little breaks in there, but I do that. I teach art classes in person. I teach children, and it is I'm still teaching, and I teach about, the dangers of these psychiatric medications as well, but it's still teaching, but it's not teaching 5 shows a day with somebody else's pace, with somebody else's curriculum. It's truly my jam. And that feels really fulfilling at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, it does lead to sort of a final, or at least another step on the healing, on the road to healing. One is being heard and appreciated and seen and connected, and the other is finding your own way to connect with the world, to get out your pain and your anguish and your joy.
It's truly an energy exchange. I mean, I understand it more than ever that I can help. I have the energy now to help. There was a period where I didn't have that energy and people were helping me. And now, thank God, I'm on the other side and I'm able to help other people. And they all say the same thing. I can't wait to be where you are so I can help other people. And I'm like, you'll get there then. You'll get there. It's so
you'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it also points to that people don't know, they're not brought up to know their gifts.
That's right. That's right.
That you have a curriculum that you're supposed to study in school, but it isn't your curriculum. I just wanted to alert Renee and perhaps even our audience to the poet Prévert, who has a condemnation of the system that we go into, where he says, at each mile, each year, old men with closed faces point out the road to children with gestures of reinforced concrete. That people don't get to know their own road and their own way. And what Renee is saying is, it can drive you over, it can drive you into such pain, being closed down at every juncture, and finding your creativity can bring you back. Connection and creativity are the 2 things that you've come up with, which are enormously important.
I was just going to add to that sentence, because I was thinking of that quote that you just read, how scary it is that young children are being put on these drugs now. I at least had a chance to get to know part of myself. How do you know who you are when you're 6 years old and put on Paxil, 9 years old on
Ritalin.
All that, all of it, Adderall, whatever. Yeah, whatever.
It was already exposed. Ritalin was exposed as a plot between the makers of Ritalin and some psychiatrists to create ADHD as a diagnosis and plug kids in.
Yeah.
It's there. It's so frightening.
Yeah, that's when it feels really, I try not to be a conspiracy theorist, but boy, it feels intentional.
Well, it's just intentional, but it's nothing evil. It's just unless, well, capitalism is evil that way. They're just making money. Everything else is invisible. And that's the immorality that you referred to, Renee, which is very important, that something's askew in the moral universe here.
Well, because capitalism depends on the wealth of few. So I do feel like you could argue it is intentional. Some people realize that you have to keep the masses down and busy and in pain and repressed. Because if they understood how powerful, if we understood how powerful we are, then...
That's right. Then we wouldn't stand for this. But I don't think it's a plot. I think they're just making money. I think that that's their moral universe. I'm making more. I'm better. It's more. It's me. It's more. That's it.
It comes from a fear place, though, really.
It does. It does. And a conformist place, because that's what's rewarded. No one asks, where'd you get your money? You have the money, you can flash it around. Anyway, I remember hearing when I was on the radio for a bit and studying the effects of Zyprexa, antipsychotic, on children, because Dr. Biederman at Harvard had okayed it, for which he got a $3.3 million lab. And a doctor who was very much a promoter of Zyprexa for children, even though it gave them diabetes, and said, they said, well, how could you do this? It gives children diabetes. He said, hey, you're racing towards $17 billion. You pay the traffic ticket.
Wow.
And that's capitalist logic. Nothing personal.
Well, there's a special place for that guy.
Yes.
You can laugh about it, actually, but these are the things that were revealed to me when I was coming through my injury. Karma is real, and when you injure people like that, you pay. There is a piper to be paid. There is.
I hope so. I hope the Sacklers are feeling it right now with OxyContin.
Do you know this? Do you know? Okay, sorry, you don't have to tape this or anything, but you can edit this out. But for real, do you know that the Sackler, the Uncle Sattler, was the one who was the marketing genius for Librium and Valium? And then he's the relative that the younger Richard Sackler looked up to and created. It's the same family. He looked up to his uncle and what he did for Librium and Valium and how he made that, Mother's Little Helper. And he created that thing called psychic tension, which is what they use to market those drugs. And Richard Sackler used that same marketing technique of with the OxyContin stuff. It's despicable. It's
they haven't seen one day of jail time.
No, it's okay. They're going to have cosmic retribution. It's way worse than jail. Way worse.
I remember in one of Dylan's songs about armaments manufacturers, it makes me think of them. Well, I'll tell you the one thing, though I'm younger than you, even Jesus himself can't forgive what you do.
Wow. Well, also, just it reminds me of that piece that you sent through, Harriet, a couple of weeks ago. It was about, to paraphrase, forgiveness is for suckers. Yeah. It's useful to be angry.
Yes, it's very useful.
At injustice. And
it's always the oppressed who are told to forgive.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it can motivate. It's motivating, right? Motivating.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is very powerful material, and that moral core, which people, when it is violated, something happens to people that's terrible. And I think that's happening all over the United States now, which is why, we had Striketober with 250,000 people on strike, and why Trump's people are going mad in their way, that people are realizing that those truths that they held self-evident have been violated, and they are violated, and they don't know what to do. It's something I hope the left can pick up, that moral dimension, the emotional dimension of what has happened in America.
Yeah, how do you make meaning out of the wreckage of all of it? That seems to be the challenge.
Make meaning how do you mobilize yourself and the decency in yourself to connect with others to change it? Which is what that guy said, the vet said at Occupy. This is the best therapy I've ever had.
Well, this is one of the really interesting things, particularly in the book as well, was this idea that the medication was supposed to make you feel better.
Right.
It made you feel worse. And then during the period of, the intense period of recovery, that the things that made you feel better were alternative therapy.
Right.
And I think that's sort of fascinating because a lot of that stuff is poo-pooed.
Yes, it is.
But if it makes you feel better, then it's working.
That's right.
I mean, there are edge cases, like there is danger to it. Like I know that sort of a known example is, I think Steve Jobs, when he had cancer, he was trying alternative therapies before maybe taking a more measured approach, and that may well have sort of formed part of the reason that he didn't make it through. So but you don't know. There's no way of sort of measuring those two things. But it comes down to that thing of like, what does the person want to do? And maybe Steve Jobs did exactly what he wanted to do. It sucks that it maybe worked out like that, but whatever. But I think this is the sort of key thing. It's like, what does it do for you and how does it make you feel? And if it makes you feel better, then maybe that's okay. Maybe that works. And who's to say that's wrong for you or that's right for you?
Well,
who has the power?
Does it make you feel, period? Does it make you feel aware? Are you connected? Or does it make you feel nothing? And so you get relief? Because that's not the object, to numb you out. Or it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And a lot of drugs do have that effect of numbing you out. And it can look like a conspiracy, but I think that they're just, greedy. There's that Karl Marx said it to some group of industrialists, accumulate, accumulate, accumulate. That is Moses and your prophets, which I think it is a sort of religion. Accumulate. More is better.
Well, that's worshiping a false idol, right? And
it is. It is.
It's just there's so much to unpack. I mean, even just what you were just saying, but I'll just keep quiet on that because I have such a spiritual view on all of this now. Like I said, I've had some real insight having been alone for years, like solitary confinement. And, I can look at Steve Jobs completely differently and think that Steve Jobs did exactly what Steve Jobs was supposed to do in this lifetime. He revolutionized, look how we're able to do this now in some ways because of him, and if we're all just bottles of milk in the refrigerator, and we all have an expiration date. Thank you. His came, and it came maybe sooner. Sometimes milk spoils faster, and I don't mean spoils like he did something wrong, but it was his time. This was what his purpose was. He did everything. He was an incredible innovator, and much of what he did was about creating connection for people. I mean, it's beautiful, and it's like, so maybe that was, we can talk about his end of life stuff, but like I think that that's a big issue in the United States. We don't have end of life ritual. We're so afraid of dying. We're terrified of suffering. We're terrified of death. And these are the things that are coming to all of us. And pretty much everything we do is always to try to somehow not have that dialogue or like cushion ourselves around that. Like, I want my children to have these things when I'm gone. And it's just like, why can't we just be in the moment and love each other right now? Because, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
You essentially had at least one, if not several, close to death experiences,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And you had the out of body experience
yes.
thing as well.
Yes.
What's your sort of take on all of that stuff? Has there been an element of like smoothing the edges of a fear of death, or did it sort of put the fear of God in you, or like what was your sort of takeaway from it all?
I would actually say both. It's an and. It's not even a fear of God. I met with God. I had a moment, and I was never a particularly religious person, and I saw the edge of what that was. I saw the edge of hell and the corner of hell and the corner of heaven, and they're real, and no one can convince me otherwise. That was my true experience, and I'm a different person. I'm a different person. I think very carefully about things. I never lie to people. I will rather tell you the truth than lie to you, because that has spiritual consequence for me. So, if you ask me if I like what you're wearing and I don't, I might say, I feel like I've seen you in you have better outfits. I've seen you in, I don't love that one as much as, I don't love that blouse as much as that other one. I will find a way to tell the truth, but, or sometimes even less delicately than that. But I would rather, it's very important for me to be in my integrity all the time. And as far as a fear of death, I have no fear of death, because I am so straight with, I feel like I got a second chance. I knew where I was going and it wasn't good. And this was a reboot. I mean, you were talking about Steve Jobs. This was when your computer crashes and you can't bring it back and you've lost all the programming and you can't get anything back. That is literally what happened to me. And it is what happens during this experience. I had to get a totally new hard drive, and it's not easy. You lose a lot, right? Think about everything that's on your computer, all the curriculum, all your calendar, all your memories, all your photos, everything that's there, your contact list, right? All the people that you thought were your friends. And I've had to reboot or buy it's a completely new program and starting fresh. And it's a slow rebuild, but it's better model. And I am not afraid to die. I came as close to death as you can twice. And death is not the thing to be afraid of. It's the being if you're not living a good life, you have a lot to be afraid of. So gotta look at your life now. People always talk about live your life like it's the last day. No. Because that sounds like a permission slip to be reckless. That is not what we're supposed to be doing. You live like you're being, like there really is a judgment. And, I'm not trying to get all religious about it. I'm this weird hybrid of this Jewish, very Orthodox Jewish girl who's now adopted, who saw something, I saw something. There really is we don't just, it's more like a Kabbalistic view that I have now, which is there really is a judgment, and our bodies go back to ashes. The shell goes away, the shell disappears and goes, but the soul, nothing dies. We come back, and whatever you do this life, it comes back. And so whatever happened to me in this life, this wasn't even necessarily something that I did this time around. This is something that had to be learned. I had to learn this time around. And I'm good. I'm straight, and I will not have to do this particular lesson again. It was horrible.
It's a relief.
Yeah, it's a relief, and I'm really clear on it. That every day that we manage to continue to, like Harriet said, try, right? Just keep going. If you can make it to the end, then that's something you don't have to repeat the next time. So all that learning is not lost. And I have a lot of spiritual information about lots of things, suicide, all that stuff. But
for you, what is where does sort of religion begin and end versus spirituality? What is the difference, and what use do they have, or no use?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, honestly, I haven't thought that much about that question. But I will tell you that I believe religion, organized religion, is another way for, I think it probably started out as a way for people to just gather and connect. Probably as simply as that, right? It was like, hey, let's go over to this place, and thank goodness we made it here, like, thank goodness. But it has morphed into something darker and cruel and one up, better than and less than. I have zero.
Profitable. We should add that one too.
What was that?
Profitable as well.
Yeah, all those mega, congregations Churches. And all that
right.
stuff. And I have no time for that, because I will also tell you, when I was very sick, I did go to my synagogue. And even prior to being sick, I went there at different times in my life to try and get some guidance. And I was always met with some dude who told me that, I'm a pretty girl and I should be able to do this and I should be able to do that. And that's all in my book or whatever. But that was not helpful. That didn't make me feel seen and heard. And so for me, I really don't have a place for, and I'm very divorced from my religion of origin. My parents have a lot of faith in Judaism, and it's not that I don't, but I guess I've decided to pick and choose from different practices. I think there's a lot of good in all of them, but none of them quite fit the me that I am now. And so for spirituality, for me is just like I said, I just had my own private experience with a near-death experience, and I received crucial information. And doctors will say to me, oh, that's because you were, there was anesthesia, they'll give scientific explanations for this stuff. And that's fine. They can give me their scientific explanations. That's fine. But whatever state I was in there, I received information. And then I received more information when I was healing and I was at the person's house who actually saved my life. And I was in her basement and I was in a theta state, and I received more information and from angels. And I don't really care if people don't believe me. I'm not trying to sell anyone anything. I just know this is true for me. It's helped to inform my life, and I will never step out of bounds with it. Does it mean I'm perfect? No. If I make a mistake, I apologize to someone. It's like the 12-step thing that you were alluding to before, Harriet. Yeah. Like, you make amends, right? You say, I am really sorry, right? I am really sorry. I was cranky, or I was impatient, or I wasn't hearing you where you were, or whatever and just whatever it was, you acknowledge it with an open heart and say, I'm really sorry. Do you want to talk about it more? Is there something else that we need, be relational with someone, but not try to ignore it, not try to pretend that something didn't happen. And then hopefully, if you're in a good situation, people will forgive you. And also you can offer that forgiveness to someone else. But I'm real straight with who I am, why I'm here, what my purpose is. And I hope that when it's my time to go, that I will receive that same kind of grace from my maker, because I've really...
Well, you're in good company, Renee. More and more, and the whole trend in the United States is that people are leaving organized religion and going into their own spiritual practice, or spiritual practice of connection with friends. That those institutions have shown themselves in so many ways to be rotten.
Yeah.
That you're in very numerous company here. Anyway, I'm late now. I have to go. Bye-bye. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful.
It's one thing to read it. It's another thing to hear you say it. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Good.
By the way, listeners, if you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
Capitalism Hits Home is a sort of
broader overhead view, it explores the way that capitalism shapes our personal lives, our psyches, our relationships, our families, and it looks particularly at the sea change in American personal life as all Americans, but the top 10 or 20% of Americans, have our security and our chance for a future become as precarious as it always was for minorities and families headed by women. It's not just in your head, and capitalism hits home are definitely complementary.
And if listeners would like to check out Capitalism Hits Home, Harriet, where should they go to find it?
Either on YouTube or Democracy at Work or on my own website, harrietfraud.com.